Hi, everyone. We're going to do the first PD seminar of the year, and I just want to introduce Hadi here. So this past summer, I was part of a workshop with Hadi, and on one of the days, Hadi invited everyone for dinner afterwards at his amazing mansion of a house in Point Grey. And at one point, he mentioned how he was a part of a lot of different startups and companies, and I was interested in this, and Hadi looked at me and said, "What do you think my academic salary paid for this house?" So Simon and I were thinking about it would be interesting to have Hadi speak about his involvement in the private sphere and working with companies and having his research interact with private companies and corporations, and also with given today's kind of saturated academic marketplace, interesting to see kind of what you can do after academia. And so we decided to chat with Hadi.
Okay, so if at first you don't succeed, go into the job entrepreneurial. Okay, fine. Thanks very much. This is actually about the fullest I've seen this room since the building was built. Okay, yeah, there you go. Yeah, well, I don't think there's anything news in that. PD was what my boarding school was called penalty drill, which was a way of wasting people's time, right? We had a very scheduled day, and PD was done in the form of walking around the square for an hour, right? So when you have a really busy day, someone wasting your time like that it was considered the highest form of punishment. But what it actually does is that for the rest of your life, it makes you incredibly impatient with anybody else who's wasting your time because you think they're punishing you, right? So, just for PD. I find it really funny to be giving this talk because I certainly haven't managed to balance anything. But I can talk to you about the tensions and rewards. And I think I need a prologue before we go any further. And I've tried to keep this short so that we can talk, really, more than anything else. So I really, really, really dislike answering to anyone, especially if they're in a position of hierarchy. And I was raised by parents who said, if we can't explain to you why you need to do something, you don't need to do it, which immediately meant that I was expelled from my first 6 schools. I'm proud of that. I don't know. It's a bit of a strange thing to move on from. And I think at almost every stage in my academic career, I have come as close as you can come to failing, right? So I was almost thrown out from my undergraduate program, and I certainly, when I handed in my thesis, my department head said, "So whose work is this?" So I had to go and write a second one. So at every stage, some tension between a boss and me, and also the only real job I had for 4 days. 4 days. The guy gave me a job. I was 18 years old. They said, "We want you to write this software for our company." It's actually the Ministry of Soils. I did, handed it back to the guy. He said, "I tested it, it didn't work." I said, "No, it's not a case of it not working. You probably didn't follow the instructions properly." "No, I did. It didn't work." "Your dumb computer didn't work." He's a guy who didn't really like computers. So imagine, I'm 18, so it's a long time ago. So the guy was saying, "No, your dumb computer didn't work." I said, "The computer is dumb, but if you follow the instructions, they'll be fine." "Nope, I followed the instructions. Your dumb computer didn't work." I said, "No, the dumb reader didn't follow the instructions." Out. Anyway, so that's the first part. My family frowned upon wealth, still does. My mother comes from a very wealthy family, and my father comes from a line of academics. And in my family, my mother had rejected the wealth of her own family, and my father certainly didn't like wealth, because otherwise he would have pursued a different kind of life, I'm guessing. So, you know, the whole notion of someone who is wealthy, pursuing wealth, being entrepreneurial for private gain was certainly frowned upon. Being as entrepreneurial as you'd like to be for public benefit, however, highly lauded. I may be a strong critic of your academic theories, but I am always willing to believe you want to do something which is not, you know, some hand underneath or something else. I believe in people being who they present themselves to be to me. And so that is also important when it comes to discussing being outside academia, actually being anywhere. But yeah, the opportunities for getting fooled are greater outside the academia than inside. And also you can, inventing stuff and doing research have one aspect to them which are really exactly the same. And that is, are you working on something that matters? Or are you working on something because you can? Or because it's an easy path to a publication? Or because it's a really fast way of making money? I've never been interested in what I would consider a trivial, right? So yeah, come and write. I mean, my sister, for example, works in Hollywood, and someone's come up with a piece of software about, I don't know, 10 years ago now, which had analyzed all movies, all the contents of all the movies, and how they'd done in the box office. And it would suggest to you, once you'd written a script, of what to modify and who to cast and where to cast it in order to maximize its returns. And they were charging a lot of money for that. And it's simply a belief network with Bayesian inputs. So my sister would say, why don't you build this? Not interesting. Is it easy to do? Trivial, right? Not interesting. So all of those as background for choices which will be revealed. So the overview is what motivates what I do, what experiences have I had, and what conclusions can I share with you. So I have definitions. University is a ghetto where socially inept folks are kept busy with problem solving away from its context. Yeah, all new students, welcome to your first PD lecture. Business, chaos of people marching to the tick of the clock and led by the greedy and myopic. So it's really funny. I have this office downtown, and my senior partners, senior both in age and in stature, really care what time I get in and what time I get out. You know, and there is this interesting philosophy there, which, having grown up at the academic world, I've never really had to live with, which is, you know, you're expected to be at your desk. Wow, not very good. And so the other side of it is, at the university, you are my mates, and you are very engaging. The rewards of that are so much greater than anything else that you can imagine to me. And business is where the context can be studied. So why do I bridge the two? Because if I'm trying to do something that's non-trivial, it has to be a problem that's solved in its context. And, you know, from here we go. So, yeah. In 1984, for my second thesis, I solved a problem where the solution to the problem dominated the context. How can you integrate big electricity grid systems? And, you know, something like 6 months after my thesis was finished, they were building it in the UK. Right? Was it, you know, what was the context? The context was that the Central Electricity Generating Board supplied electricity to England, and the South of Scotland Electricity Board was supplying electricity in Scotland, and they ran completely independent grids. And I just did a little calculation that showed that if you build a big transmission line between the two of them, they could save a lot of money. I wasn't interested in the money side of it. I was interested in the technical side of coordinating 60 gigawatts of electricity generation, right? But the context was dominated by the value of this thing, and it was done. Experience two, when the problem is shaped by the context, no solution from the ghetto will see the light of day. So together with Lord May, he's now Lord, he wasn't then, and Roy Anderson, and Sally Blower at the time, we built the first HIV/AIDS model with full representation of infection movements and stuff like that. And this was for New York. And we took it to Mayor Koch and said, these are the bridges of the infection. Sex workers and needle sharing were the major bridges that you could actually address. No interest in doing anything about it, right? And so nothing went on. And in fact, it was really interesting because I got Time and Newsweek interested in the story of how it was we had this solution, but Koch was more powerful, and the stories were quashed, right? So you really have to worry about what kind of problems you can tackle and who you need to have on side in order for what you hope to do to actually come about. We're 12 minutes in. Is that okay? Experiences that failed at the starting gate. This list could be way, way longer. But back in 2000 and actually, wait a sec. All of these I started on my sabbatical. So 2007, 2008. And so the first one was this idea of if you're going to build the the ice rink in Richmond, they're going to also build 3 million square feet of residential and commercial space around it. I said, well, you're going to have all the waste heat from making the ice, so why don't you use that to heat the building? It was going beautifully. Found financing for the technology. The developer was really reluctant. We did all sorts of stuff, including sending David Suzuki to Hong Kong, where the brothers funding the apartment structure were residing, to kind of tell them that politically, if David went on the offensive, this would be not at all to their advantage. This company is called Aspec. Their lawyers wrote a letter to Richmond saying, what do you do about guarantee of heat supply? And that was enough for Richmond to pull back. Well, actually, if you read your contract with your gas utility or your electric utility, there is no guarantee, right? There's a promise to do the best they can, but the lawyer didn't turn around and ask me or somebody else, how should I answer this question? The answer that he said was, we don't want any liability. Zero, right? We can't do anything, and that actually quashed the project. In retrospect, we were lucky because the building wasn't built, and there was going to be $8 to $12 million of investment in infrastructure whose return was going to be people's heating and cooling bills. But because the buildings weren't built, that investor, which is a retirement account out of Montreal, would have been really mad at us. Because a project like that, you build it, and then you start collecting revenue on the services you provide. LED lighting instead of HPS in public areas. Nanaimo almost went with this, and then they worried about risk. Has there been LED lighting in public areas before other than traffic lights? No. But there's all this research that shows you can use a lot less lumens in the right part of the light spectrum and get scotopic light instead of photopic light, and get people to see what they want to see more effectively with something like 1/5 of the energy input, right? Has this been done elsewhere? No. Again, floundered. Now I read actually last week that Los Angeles has the largest collection of streets with exactly what we propose, which is scotopic lighting using LEDs in their city. Driftwood for cogeneration on the Fraser. If you guys go on a boat around our shorelines, you will see lots and lots and lots of wood all over the shore. This is stuff that usually gets released because somebody carrying wood to woodlots has lost some of their load. Most of it is like that. There is a thing that I'm a member of called the Union of Beachcombers, which collects the wood and had a monopsony buyer on the Fraser to sell the wood to. and the monopsony buyer was a representative of the major lumber companies. And so they were offering something like $12 per cubic meter for the wood that you delivered to them. The energy value of the wood is at least $25. So with my partner, we went and tried to lease the land north of the airport to put a cogeneration unit on there and then get the beachcombers to deliver the wood to us, right? Why did that flounder? It floundered for two reasons. One is that the would have been in salt water, and if you burn wood that's been in salt water without careful attention to the temperature at which it burns, you create dioxins. And even though we found a technology that does address that by having very well-controlled combustion temperatures, we worried that the public, once they hear about dioxin, would reject the whole solution, right? It's one of those things, it's like one of those trigger words. Once you mention it, it's unlikely that it'll go forward. But a lot of work was done on what to do, how to do, all of that kind of stuff. And Ryan, is he here? Yeah. There's another opportunity to look at this now with the big development project that the airport has on their property. And so we're going to visit it again and hopefully see what happens. Buyer cooperatives for owners of buildings used by BC social housing. The vast majority of social housing in BC is not owned by the province. The vast majority is privately owned. And so it occurred to me that if I went and talked to the appliance suppliers, maybe I could find out what the true cost difference between a really efficient appliance and the crappiest appliance that they usually sell to these renters is. As you know, appliance efficiency in rented space is always an agency problem. The person who pays the bill isn't the person who was buying the appliance. So as far as the person who's the landlord is concerned, buying the least expensive appliance is the best solution. I'm not paying the bill. They want a fridge? Sure, this is the cheapest refrigerator I can get you. But as far as the whole society is concerned, getting the most efficient one is the best one there, in particular because those who are in social housing have the least amount of money to spend on electricity bills. So I went and talked to the suppliers, Sears, as well as Trail, and the supply chain. Guys at Trail went and talked to their suppliers, and it looked like we could buy the most efficient refrigerator at the same price as the least efficient refrigerators right now are being delivered to consumers when they're bought one at a time. As long as we turned around and said, we want this size, and this size, and there is no color variation or any inside gubbins, right? All of that. There's 3,000 refrigerators a year, by the way, bought by this group. 3,000, right? So if I could buy 3,000 refrigerators that are differentiated simply by their internal volume, the price of those refrigerators would be the same as the crap that they usually buy. Couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. Why not? Because the BC Housing Association was getting a kickback from their normal vendors, and they were not willing to forego that. It was actually a large part of their revenue stream. So the mechanism, the aggregator of that demand is that housing association, but the housing association wouldn't be benefiting from it. They would have to let people go. So those are all things that have failed at the starting gate, and I'd be, if we had time, I could give you lots more. Experiences that failed mid-course. The first one took 6 years to die and $20 million. A very long and protracted death. Simple idea. Canada produces about, at the time, 2005, was producing 9 million tons of canola and selling 7. If you put 9 million tons of canola on the market, the price of canola collapses. So what the farmers were doing was plowing 2 million back underground. And I thought, holy cow. On the one hand, we have corn ethanol for greenhouse gas reduction from transportation fuels, which is not a greenhouse gas reduction once you actually do the full life cycle analysis. But canola oil is actually a very good one. It's about 85% greenhouse gas reduction when you switch canola biodiesel for diesel. And I said, okay, so farmers would like this. Why don't we do this? Get the farmers to provide the canola. They get a market structure that guarantees their pricing. Get the so we spent a lot of money getting the biodiesel requirement in BC and federally. We spent, so basically this is private money changing public policy, right? And we spent a lot of money persuading the fossil fuel industry that canola-based biodiesel would work fine in the engine when blended with their fuel. Their argument was, we are small potatoes. If something happened to their engines when they used the blend, they would be the deep pockets that consumers would be taking class action, filing class action suits against. So they said, no, you have to prove to us that this works. We've proved it over here, we proved it over there, nope, you have to prove it here in Canada that this works. So, you know, there we are, a small little startup company, shareholder money, doing experiments with the Shells and BPs and Petrocans of this world, showing them that biodiesel blended with canola biodiesel blended with fossil diesel was going to work and not harm the engine. That project floundered because big fossil weren't interested in supporting it, and the established renewables were not interested in sharing any of the subsidy, right? So all the companies that already did corn ethanol were going to get this huge big subsidy from the government. It was $520 billion that the government gave away, some stupid number. And they wanted the lion's share of it. They didn't want to share it with any. There's still no biodiesel based on vegetable oil industry in Canada. All of it comes from the US. Electric vehicles for fleet operators. Oh, by the way, the idea is good. ADM bought everything we did for $1 million, and they're building it in Lloydminster. That's on the boundary between Alberta and Saskatchewan. And so, you know, the same everything, our permits, our everything, but they bought that for $1 million, and they're building their plant. Electric vehicle, and I would also, if I was in a conspiratorial mode, I would say that they and Bunge colluded in order to make us fail so that they could do this to us. Bunge and ADM are the two major crushers in Canada. They crush the canola and get the oil. So whatever we had to do, we had to go through one of these two guys. Electric vehicles for fleet operators. I've always thought EVs are stupid. They have all sorts of limitations. I still believe EVs are stupid. I was buying a car, and the car salesman wanted to tell me about my new Honda Fit. And I said to him, Jay, I don't want you to tell me about the Honda Fit. I probably know more about it than you do. I've been driving them in Europe for the past 3 years, and I've been lobbying people in Toronto to import them into Canada. I said, instead of telling me that, tell me what you want to do. He said, I want to open up an electric car dealership. I said, so whose cars are you going to sell? Well, they'll come. I said, so have you ever worked out the economics of it? Well, we sat down at a table once and showed him that the economics of it required him to sell a lot of cars for that model to work. Said, on the other hand, the major problem with electric vehicles is that they have limited range. If you have a fleet of vehicles and you operate a fleet, you know the duty cycle of the different parts of the fleet. And so in that setting, and where you want to show off that you are green, there is a market. It turns out almost all municipal governments are interested in that. Almost all utilities are interested in that. And so there's 14 million Ford F-150s in North America. 14 million. It's the most popular car on the road. It's also the target of retrofits, right? So if you were to design a retrofit program with Ford to convert their Ford F-150s to electric, you'd have a market. That's what I proposed to Jay. We raised the money for it, built a company around it, and we sold 6 cars. It turned out that the controller assembly that we were using was being manufactured by a group of folks down in the States who were used to really, really fat margins with electric bus manufacturers. And they went bankrupt, and the cost of redesigning all of our end in order to address their shift or their absence was too much for us to survive. So that company went belly up. It's now only exists to service those 6 cars. They're all over there is one in Santa Monica, there is one in Waterloo. It's a nightmare. But when you sell a car, you've made a promise to keep it running. So, and all that remains is we created a little dongle that talks between the car and the internet. That's what remains, and it's probably the most valuable piece of widget that we created for this car. And that has a whole new life, and it's a whole new company. I actually forgot even to mention it. It's Moj.io, and hopefully that'll succeed. Kites for wind power. Joel Atwater and the 2 other guys came and said, why don't we use kites for making wind power? We said, great, we'll do that. Started that up, have all sorts of patents. It turned out it's really, really hard to do this completely automatically. And so we gave up. Some guy in Japan is now interested in that idea. So he's licensed all of our stuff from us, all of our know-how. If he succeeds, we'll get royalties. If he fails, it's not being our time and effort expended on it. But kites for wind power has the potential to be a heck of a lot more economical than big wind turbines, because almost all of the energy that comes to a wind turbine is from its very tips, right? And so essentially you're building a huge big mast, huge big blades for the tip. And when you do a kite, you actually are only building the tip. And all the rest of the energy you recover using a traction method. Community bioenergy complex for Seike Dene. That's way, way more than the amount of time we have left. But essentially there is about 100 years of wood supply on Lake Williston for a community of 200 growing to be 250 now to convert to heat and power for their community. And it turned out that, various incompetencies, not the least of which is me, and some of it is BC Hydro, and some of it are the people for whom we are trying to create this. Some of it is the way Canada treats First Nations. So, for example, we're in the process of trying to get building permission, and it turns out the land isn't in a category for which a building permission can be issued. So you kind of say, what is it? Is it a reserve? No, we haven't declared this a reserve yet. And when did they move here? Well, they moved here 25 years ago. And so where did these structures come from? Well, they just put it on top of the land. So whose land is it? Well, it's in limbo land, right? So sad story. Not able to go forward there. I can't tell you how much time and effort has gone into Bullet 4. Sonia's thesis came out of it. Right? Sonia Wilson got a thesis out of it, and she's now working with Carewood Lydell, and they're absolutely delighted with what she can help them with. We built a model that BC Bioenergy Network uses for estimating when they should be building a biomass system, when the alternatives might be useful. All of that stuff those are all good academic outputs from this effort, but it is incredibly depressing to put so much work into something this, and let's just see it flounder at the last step. We won $2 million of grant money for that even. Had to give it back. Reducing adverse health effects of public transit. This is work that Brian gouged it for his thesis. We got a really good external partner in Giro, who are a very well-known transportation consulting firm specializing in public transit, to come and say, okay, we will help you integrate this in the way we do systems planning and offer services to our clients, but do it for Vancouver. We said, fine, we don't care where we do it for, we do it for Vancouver. Well, it turns out that there are two big competing companies in Canada, actually worldwide. The two most prominent are Giro and a company out of Mississauga called Trapeze. Vancouver is a client of Trapeze. Giro is interested in winning over Vancouver. Giro will do whatever they can with us in order to win over Vancouver, right? In Vancouver, there are people who are friendly with Trapeze. So even when we show them a solution that saves them, in the study that we did, something like 5% of their operational costs, they will find some reason to believe that they can't do this. And that's exactly what we got, right? So we were then, after pushing and pushing and pushing, we did all of that work so that by the Vancouver Olympics, we would have this fancy new way of dispatching buses. Didn't work. And then after that, everybody we dealt with got fired at TransLink. Everyone. So the VP, Mike Scher, got fired. Michelle Blake got fired. Every one of them got fired. Hey, at least I'm not getting fired for doing academic work. And right now, our best client is actually Seattle. Last week I called them back, and I said, guys, we had a really good meeting on Earth Day. Are you doing anything about it? They said, your talk persuaded us that we should just clean up all of our buses. Right? So the idea, but then the next paragraph says, and we have no money. So it's this really interesting thing that even though the idea was to help people not necessarily clean their fleet of buses, but to use their fleet in a way that is less harmful to public health, that was not how you can sell the idea, right? And so for them, it became a case of, well, where do we put the clean buses? And well, would the people who are now getting dirty buses get upset about that? And that's the real context. That's the real context, and you can so easily fail by recognizing that. So successes. This is the first one, paid for the house. Track users' internet searches and then pitch something to them related to their tracking. Google clicks, right? We invented that on a squash court at Carnegie Mellon, Kevin and I, and launched a company called WiseWire that was then bought by Lycos, which then licensed its operations. I don't get any money from you guys clicking on Google anymore, I can tell you that. But that's how I have a house, where I have a house. It's not on an academic salary. Improve graphics on mobile devices. So that was another idea that came up with. This new machine, you guys seen ads for Snapdragon from Motorola? Motorola X has it, the new Moto X phone that everyone got advertising for last month. That's the product of one of our companies that Motorola then bought. So that is another success story. Too early to tell. Hydrokinetic electricity generation. So a subset of the same guys who did the wind kite turned around and said, whoa, it's really hard to know when the wind is blowing so that you can lift it up. And the wind shifts directions, and you have to have this. But rivers, surprisingly enough, flow in one direction and usually are there, unless they are really seasonal. So why don't we apply exactly the same concept to a river? You have one less dimension to worry about, right? And you don't have to worry about whether the river is dry or not, and you don't have to worry about whether the river's flow direction is changing. So we have a machine, and it works, and our performance is about equal to a diesel generator right now, and our goal is to make electricity for less than the grid price in BC. So we're going to be doing our first demonstration machine, so this is a full-scale machine, by January. So I'm very, very optimistic about that project. It's really cool. It's the team of, it's 5 people, all engineers, and legally it is classified as a boat. So the environmental impacts actually are of a boat. You know, and it has, so it's really interesting. So you have to study exactly what it is you can do about it. And it's essentially an underwater robot, aware of its environment. So it looks for, is there anything coming towards me, and then avoids whatever might be coming towards it. And retracting to a home position if it looks like, you know, a horde of people are coming towards it. So we're really worried about hitting swimmers or boats or driftwood coming downstream. So the machine automatically senses its environment and changes its trajectory. It's like, you know, you have an acrobatic kite. You can move out of the way of another kite. You move out of the way of any obstruction or anything that could come and collide with you. Almost all of our work is in that secret sauce of how to get all of that into a package that then you maneuver down the thing. When we went for the patent application, there isn't even the idea in the patent space, right? So you kind of usually say, oh, something like this is there, and I'm adding, you know, a bell or a whistle to it. It looks like a whole new branch of patents. So that's cool. Co-firing of hospital waste in cement kilns. Just started that. Pilots are underway. This one is, this one's funny. This has been done in Iran, which up until now was just dumping hospital waste. It's still dumping most of the hospital waste. So this is, again, context. There's real reluctance amongst the industry to do anything with this, to actually go forward with this, because their belief is that as soon as you make something good with this waste, people will not pay you to take it away, but charge you to take it away. Right? And I can't write a contract that says, pay me to take this waste away, because they'll just say, tear it up. And so I have to find some way for this relationship to work. And it's an interesting relationship to negotiate. What I found is a very, very generous donor who donated the hospital and owns some cement kilns. So we'll see where we could go from that. Okay, so conclusions. There are lots of fascinating people in the chaos, which kind of keeps me in that space as well. Don't let your interests lead to misjudging the context. Yeah, I really, really didn't believe that the fossil industry would play as dirty as they did for the biodiesel. You know, I mean, you'd go to meetings and they would be really nice. And I didn't think the renewable energy folks would play dirty, right? I thought that we would kind of have a united front and interest in, because we're not taking anything away from ethanol. If you're making biodiesel, you're not taking away the ethanol market. We were taking away the subsidy to the ethanol market. I should have understood that better than I did. 5 keys to success. Governance. I would say every single company that failed had at least one governance flaw. In that, you know, you need to be able to have a board that's functional, a team of directors who understand their obligations towards their shareholders, and so on. And I think that that's always a problem. Also, inventor CEOs are they value their brains over the enabling inputs of everything else. And so these lists could be so much longer if I could tell you about all the people who didn't even get to the starting gate. Because of all the people who, over the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, we've sat at the table and said, okay, what do you bring to the table? What do you bring to the table? How can we go forward? And they just think that, all they need to do is to think it up. And to think it up is actually the easiest part. It really is the easiest part. It's really, really difficult to take something from just a thought to a product that consumers willingly pay money for, and so on. Independence from public policy. It's funny for someone whose research is mostly on public policy to say that outside, if you want to succeed, please go after problems which are independent of public policy. They are so fickle, especially in Canada, right? Because they can be there but not enforced. You can't go and get them enforced. If this were, I would not have that. I wouldn't say that in the States. I wouldn't say that in Europe. But I do say that strongly in Canada. There is a lot of talk and almost no action to follow up. And it's very, very difficult to push, a good example being the renewable fuel subsidy that the federal government provided, to push and succeed where there isn't an already very well established pig at the trough. You can't create a trough for new pigs in Canada. Let me put this. I have not been able to, and I have not witnessed one. But I've witnessed a lot of well-established pigs at new troughs. Actually, might be a public policy talk. Luck. Yes, you have to be lucky. Anyone who believes that they managed to get to where they are, even you in this room, in the absence of luck, is perhaps a little bit self-delusional about their own worth rather than the circumstances that brought them to where they are. Hard work. And then finally, these startup companies are all small people, in terms of small numbers of people working really, really hard, which makes you all edgy. You have to have shared values. If you don't have shared values, you will not succeed. I hope I've answered the questions that you were asking. That is the last slide. Thank you. Yeah, it's up to you.